Knox County students. I'm Jeff Bronner and I teach at Southdale Middle School. Today's lesson is based on Task 3 for 8th grade ELA. If you do not have this assignment, it can be found by visiting the KCS website at knoxschools.org. Click See All Resources under the KCS at Home logo. Please be sure to complete the entire week's task before continuing this video. As I said, if you have not completed the KCS at Home Summer Edition task number 3 for 8th grade, stop and return to this video once you have finished your work so we can go over it together. Now, let's get started. A few notes before we get started. If this video is hard to understand, turn on closed captions if they're available. Adjust the video playback speed to slow down the video. Consider watching short clips, then pause, listen, and watch again. Ask someone in your home to watch the video with you. Stop frequently and talk to your partner about what you heard and understood. Here are learning objectives. In this activity, you will read an excerpt from a novel and think about the author's use of irony to create comic situations. We will analyze comic situations in a literary text collaboratively. We will also determine the impact of word choice on meaning and tone in a comic situation. Here's some vocabulary we need to talk about before we read the text. Irony is a literary device that plays on readers' expectations by portraying events in a way that is actually different from reality. Irony can make a situation seem funny to a reader or viewer. Comic situations can be created in many different ways. One way is by placing a character in an unlikely situation in which he or she obviously does not belong. Another way is by portraying characters as victims of circumstances who are surprised by unusual events and react in a comical way. Lastly, by creating situational irony, where there is contrast between what characters or readers might reasonably expect to happen and what actually happens. Situational irony is one of 3 different types of irony. The others are dramatic irony and verbal irony. Now, we will read an excerpt from Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, written by Mark Twain. We will annotate the text, which means to mark the text, and the 2 ways we will annotate is by underlining any examples of the comic situations, and we'll circle words or phrases that we're not familiar with. There are tons of other ways to annotate. These are just the 2 that I'm going to emphasize in this lesson. Your teacher might have taught you different ways, and that's fine. You can utilize those as well. Note, whenever you come across a word you do not know, try to use context clues, word parts, or a dictionary to determine its meaning. As we go through the passage today, there will be footnotes that will give us glossary definitions of some of the words that are highlighted in purple. A few more disclaimers before we read. This book was written in 1876, so there are some things to expect. There will be unfamiliar language. We will discuss some of them, but you may need to look some up on your own. Use the methods we discussed above to do that. We will discuss how Twain purposely uses language later in the lesson when we talk about dialect. There may be references that are unclear to a 21st century reader, so use context clues to sort some of the words or phrases out. There are also some words denoting people's race and ethnicity that appear in the text. We do not use these words now, for they are offensive. However, I will read them when I do my read aloud, so prepare yourself for that. Now, we will do the read aloud, and then we will talk about the text-dependent questions. I will begin by reading Setting a Purpose for Reading. As you read the excerpt, underline any comic situations you find for further analysis later. Circle any unknown words or phrases. Try to determine the meaning of the words by using context clues, word parts, or a dictionary, as we discussed earlier. Here's a little bit about the author. Born Samuel Langhorne Clemens, Mark Twain, 1835 to 1910, was an American author and humorist. He adopted his pen name while writing stories, sketches, and editorials as a reporter. His style, often funny and satirical, made him famous. He is noted for his novels The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, 1885, and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, 1876. He has been lauded as the greatest American humorist of his age. So one thing to pay attention to is that Mark Twain is noted as funny and satirical. So we can anticipate, we can expect as we read this passage that it's going to be funny. It's going to be satirical, which means it makes fun of certain situations. So Tom Sawyer is a young boy who is about to do his daily chore, and Mark Twain is going to have a lot of fun making fun of this situation and causing us to think about some interesting points that he makes, especially from the perspective of Tom Sawyer. And we'll see how Tom turns what was once a dull, boring activity into one that's quite enjoyable and especially fun for us to read about, even now. So, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain, a day's work. Saturday morning was come, and all the summer world was bright and fresh and brimming with life. There was a song in every heart, and if the heart was young, the music issued at the lips. There was cheer in every face and a spring in every step. The locust trees were in bloom, and the fragrance of blossoms filled the air. Cardiff Hill, beyond the village and above it, was green with vegetation, and it lay just far enough away to seem a delectable land, dreamy, reposeful, and inviting. Tom appeared on the sidewalk with a bucket of whitewash and a long-handled brush. He surveyed the fence, and all gladness left him, and a deep melancholy settled down upon his spirit. 30 yards of board fence 9 feet high. Life to him seemed hollow, and existence but a burden. Sighing, he dipped his brush and passed it along the topmost plank, repeated the operation, did it again, compared the insignificant whitewashed streak with the far-reaching continent of unwhitewashed fence, and sat down on a tree box discouraged. Jim came skipping out at the gate with a tin pail and singing Buffalo Gals. Bringing water from the town pump had always been a hateful work in Tom's eyes before, but now it did not strike him so. He remembered that there was company at the pump. White, mulatto, and Negro boys and girls were always there waiting their turns, resting, trading playthings, quarreling, fighting, skylarking. And he remembered that although the pump was only 150 yards off, Jim never got back with a bucket of water under an hour, and even then somebody generally had to go after him. Tom said, "Say, Jim, I'll fetch the water if you'll whitewash some." Jim shook his head and said, "Can't, Mars Tom. Old Missus, she told me I got to go and get this water and stop fooling around with anybody. She say she spect Mars Tom going to ask me to whitewash, and she told me to go along and tend to my own business, as she allowed she'd tend to the whitewashing." "Oh, never you mind what she said, Jim. That's the way she always talks. Give me the bucket. I won't be gone only a minute. She won't even know." "Oh, that doesn't matter, Tom. Old Missus, she'll take and tar the head off on me. 'Deed she would. She never licks anybody. Whacks 'em over the head with her thimble, and who cares for that, I'd like to know. She talks awful, but talk don't hurt. Anyways, if she don't cry, Jim, I'll give you a marvel. I'll give you a white alley." Jim began to waver. "White alley, Jim, and it's a bully tall." "My, that's a mighty gay marvel, I tell you. Mars Tom, I's powerful afraid of old Missus. And besides, if you will, I'll show you my sore toe." Jim was only human. This attraction was too much for him. He put down his pail, took the white alley, and bent over the toe with absorbing interest while the bandage was being unwound. In another moment, he was flying down the street with his pail and a tingling rear. Tom was whitewashing with vigor, and Aunt Polly was retiring from the field with a slipper in her hand and triumph in her eye. Tom's energy did not last. He began to think of the fun he had planned for this day, and his sorrows multiplied. Soon the three boys would come tripping along on all sorts of delicious expeditions, and they would make a world of fun of him for having to work. The very thought of it burnt him like fire. He got out his worldly wealth and examined it. Bits of toys, marbles, and trash. Enough to buy an exchange of work, maybe, but not half enough to buy so much as half an hour of pure freedom. So he returned to his straitened means to his pocket and gave up the idea of trying to buy the boys. At this dark and hopeless moment, an inspiration burst upon him. Nothing less than a great, magnificent inspiration. He took up his brush and went tranquilly to work. Ben Rogers hove in sight presently, the very boy of all boys, whose ridicule he'd been dreading. Ben's gait was the hop, skip, and jump, proof enough that his heart was light and his anticipations high. He was eating an apple and giving a long, melodious whoop at intervals, followed by a deep tone ding-dong-dong, ding-dong-dong, for he was personating a steamboat. As he drew near, he slackened speed, took the middle of the street, leaned far over to starboard, and rounded ponderously and with laborious pomp and circumstance, for he was personating the big Missouri, and considered himself to be drawing 9 feet of water. He was boat and captain and engine bells combined, so he had to imagine himself standing on his own hurricane deck, giving the orders and executing them. "Stop her, sir! Ting-a-ling-ling!" The headway ran almost out, and he drew up slowly toward the sidewalk. "Ship up the back! Ting-a-ling-ling!" His arms straightened and stiffened down his sides. "Set her back on starboard! Ting-a-ling-ling! Chow, 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 wow, chow." His right hand, meantime, describing stately circles, for it was representing a 40-foot wheel. "Let her go out and back on the larboard! Ting-a-ling-ling! Chow, chow, chow." The left hand began to describe circles. "Stop the starboard! Ting-a-ling-ling! Stop the left board! Come ahead on the starboard! Stop her! Let your outside turn over slow! Ting-a-ling-ling! Chow, chow, chow! Get out the headline! Lively now! Come out with your spring line! What are you about there? Take around that stump with the bite of it! Stand by that stage now! Let her go! Down with the engine, sir! Ting-a-ling-ling! Shh! 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 Trying to gauge the cocks. Tom went on whitewashing, paid no attention to the steamboat. Ben stared a moment and then said, "Hey! You're up a stump, ain't you?" No answer. Tom surveyed his last touch with the eye of an artist. Then he gave his brush another gentle sweep and surveyed the result as before. Ben ranged up alongside of him. Tom's mouth watered for the apple, but he stuck to his work. Ben said, "Hello, old chap. You got to work, eh?" Tom wheeled suddenly and said, "Why, it's you, Ben. I weren't noticing." "Say, I'm going in a swimming, I am. Don't you wish you could? But of course, you'd rather work, wouldn't you? Of course you would." Tom contemplated the boy a bit and said, "What do you call work?" "Why, ain't that work?" Tom resumed his whitewashing and answered carelessly, "Well, maybe it is, maybe it ain't. All I know is it suits Tom Sawyer." "Oh, come now, you don't mean to let on that you like it?" The brush continued to move. "Like it? Well, I don't see why I oughtn't to like it. Does a boy get a chance to whitewash a fence every day?" That put the thing in a new light. Ben stopped nibbling his apple. Tom swept his brush daintily back and forth, stepped back to note the effect, added a touch here and there, criticized the effect again. Ben watching every movement and getting more and more interested and more absorbed. Presently, he said, "Say, Tom, let me whitewash a little." Tom considered, was about to consent, but he altered his mind. No, I reckon it wouldn't hardly do. Ben, you see, Aunt Polly is awful particular about this fence. Right here on the street, you know. But if it was the back fence, I wouldn't mind, and she wouldn't. Yeah, she's awful particular about this fence. It's got to be done very careful. I reckon there ain't one boy in 1,000, maybe 2,000, that can do it the way it's got to be done. No, is that so? Oh, come now. Let me just try. Only just a little. I'd let you if you was me, Tom. Ben, I'd like to, honest injun. But Aunt Polly, well, Jim wanted to do it, but she wouldn't let him. Sid wanted to do it, but she wouldn't let Sid. Now, don't you see how I'm fixed? If you was to tackle this fence and anything was to happen to it, oh, shucks, I'll be just as careful. Now, let me try. Say, I'll give you the core of my apple. Well, here. No, Ben, now don't. I'm afeard I'll give you all of it. Tom gave up the brush with reluctance in his face, but alacrity in his heart. And while the late steamer Big Missouri worked and sweated in the sun, the retired artist sat on a barrel in the shade close by, dangled his legs, munched his apple, and planned the slaughter of more innocents. There was no lack of material. Boys happened along every little while. They came to jeer, but remained to whitewash. By the time Ben was fagged out, Tom had traded the next chance to Billy Fisher for a kite in good repair. And when he played out, Johnny Miller bought him for a dead rat and a string to swing it on. And so on, hour after hour. And when the middle of the afternoon came, from being a poor poverty-stricken boy in the morning, Tom was literally rolling in wealth. He had, besides the things before mentioned, 12 marbles, parts of a Jew harp, a piece of blue bottle glass to look through, a spool cannon, a key that wouldn't unlock anything, a fragment of chalk, a glass stopper of a decanter, a tin soldier, a couple of tadpoles, 6 firecrackers, a kitten with only one eye, a brass doorknob, a dog collar, but no dog, the handle of a knife, 4 pieces of orange peel, and a dilapidated old window sash. So now that we've gone through our read through, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Let's go back through and look at a couple of the annotations that I made, and then we'll go through our text-dependent questions together. So on this first page, some things that I circled was whitewash, and that is given to us in the side here, on the side over here. It says the word whitewash has come to have a second meaning. In this story, whitewash means a whitening mixture used on fences and walls. The word has also come to mean to conceal or cover up crimes, scandals, flaws, or failures. You can see how this usage comes from the idea of whitewash used to cover up something bad. So it's basically the chore that Tom's having to do here is to repaint the fence, basically. This whitewash is a chemical mixture that goes over this exterior fence, and it covers up all the dirt and grime that's on it and makes it look a lot prettier. And then down here, I circled skylarking. We can tell from the context clues that skylarking means something to do with an activity that kids might do in a social setting. But if you're not satisfied with that definition, you can always look it up. So I looked it up, and it means a pastime by playing tricks or practical jokes, indulge in horseplay. So some sort of, it's synonymous with the quarreling, the fighting, and the playthings. It's basically just kids goofing off together. This word right here, white alley, if you weren't able to guess from context clues, they're actually talking about a marble, not a marvel. We'll come back to talk about how marvel versus marble is evidence of dialect, and Mark Twain using dialect. This annotation right here, this is supposed to be an underline, I apologize. This is an example of how Oh, I'm sorry. We'll come back to that annotation in a little while. That's actually another example of dialect. Down here, we have an underlying comic situation, and in another moment, he was flying down the street with his pale and tingling rear. Tom was whitewashing with vigor, and Aunt Polly was retiring from the field with a slipper in her hand and triumph in her eye. So this is a moment that I thought was really funny because this is basically Tom's first attempt at getting out of whitewashing, and Aunt Polly crushes his dreams. And in the heat of that moment, right after his dreams are crushed, of course, typical Tom Sawyer gets all depressed and melodramatic, which just basically means he's over the top dramatic. And so he says right here, at this dark and hopeless moment, all hope has been lost because he has to whitewash this fence. He has to do his chores. And then above this, straightened gives you the definition down here. It just means characterized by poverty. Down here, there's a word we might not be familiar with. It's also another note we can make about dialect, and I'll talk about it later. Personating, that actually is the word impersonating, impersonating. When somebody does an impersonation, they are pretending to be something else or someone else. And in this instance, Ben is impersonating the Big Missouri. It's a steamboat. There's this whole section up here. This is really funny, the way that Mark Twain describes this boy being the Big Missouri. And then we get, over here, we get Tom Sawyer, an illustration of him very carefully whitewashing the fence to convince Ben that he really enjoys it. And we get more of that in the text right here. Tom surveyed his last touch with the eye of an artist, and then he gave his brush another gentle sweep and surveyed the result as before. So he's really hamming it up to convince Ben that he really enjoys this chore. He goes on later when he says, does a boy get a chance to whitewash a fence every day? And you see how Tom Sawyer is being very clever in the way he's twisting this chore into a very enjoyable activity, or rare opportunity even, to sell it to Ben. And Ben bites whole hog. I thought this was funny too, just the way, the cadence of the sentence. I reckon there ain't one boy in 1,000, maybe 2,000. That's just funny how Tom is just really playing it up. Here we go. Down here, some more words we might not recognize. Alacrity, dilapidated. Here we have the glossary on the side. And then this line right here, Tom was literally rolling in wealth when he had just a couple trinkets and seemingly random worthless items, a key that wouldn't unlock anything. Yeah, just a couple of random items. It might, to a 12-year-old boy, be very exciting and considered wealth. So, very good. Now let's look at the text-dependent questions, and we will answer those together. So make sure you return to the text as you're answering the questions using evidence to support your answers. And then you can ask additional questions on a notebook separately. So first text-dependent question. What does the word reposeful mean in paragraph 1? What clues in the text help you understand the meaning of the word? So the answer was, reposeful means calm and peaceful. Words and phrases that provide clues to its meaning include morning, song in every heart, locust trees were in bloom, fragrance of the blossoms, and dreamy. What does the word melancholy mean in paragraph 2? What clues in the text help you understand the meaning of the word? Use a print or digital resource to determine the word origin of melancholy. How has the word's meaning changed over time? Melancholy means sadness. All gladness left him. The melancholy is described as deep and settling down on him. Life is described as hollow and existence a burden. Tom is described as a sighing. The word melancholy comes from Old French and meant to have an excess of black bile in your body, which explained a person's bad mood. Number 3, one of the notable characteristics of Twain's style is his use of verbals. Examine paragraph 2 and highlight all the verbals. Verbals in paragraph 2 include the following: sighing, whitewashed, far-reaching, unwhitewashed, discouraged, skipping, singing, etc. There's others in there you could pull if you would like. Number 4, how does Tom try to get Jim to help him in chunk 3? Why does he fail? Tom offers to do Jim's job and then offers to give him a marble and to show him his sore toe. He fails because Aunt Polly arrives. Also, just to note, that moment where he offers to show Jim his sore toe, that's also a comedic situation. Very funny and weird. Number 5, how does Twain use steamboat jargon for effect in chunk 4? Twain has been emphasized his impersonation of a steamboat captain by using the jargon of that trade: starboard, larboard, headline, springline. Number 6, Tom tries to manipulate his friends into doing whitewashing for him. How does he change his plan in chunk 5 after Jim's refusal to help? Rather than offering a simple exchange of goods, as he had done with Jim, Tom acts like he wants to paint the fence so that Ben will be jealous. What is ironic about Tom's plan to get out of whitewashing the fence? Whitewashing the fence is not a fun activity, but he convinces the other boys that it is enjoyable. He manages not to miss out on any summer activities because all the boys are hanging out with him. What is the intended effect of listing Tom's treasures in such great detail in paragraph 44? What does the audience understand about the value of these things that is different from Tom's point of view? The intended effect is humor. The details themselves are humorous. A kitten with only one eye and 4 pieces of orange peel are not things that one would normally consider wealth. Here's some vocab that we can talk about before we continue. I mentioned a lot already dialect, and what dialect means is it's a regional or social variety of a language that distinguished by pronunciation, grammar, or vocabulary. The section of the story includes a depiction of Tom and Jim's dialects. So here's a couple, number 9, ask you to review the definition that I just gave you. Return to the text and place a D by examples of dialect, then try to paraphrase a few lines of dialogue in my notes. I pulled a couple. These are just examples of the Southern language that is intermixed throughout the whole text. The narrator speaks pretty straightforward, standardized English, but when you get people talking and a lot of the dialogue, that's where you see the dialect come in to help with characterization and making the characters really come alive. So Tom says, "I'm afeared," which just means I'm afraid. He says, "I weren't noticing." When Ben was asking him, when Ben comes up, he says, "I weren't noticing." And in line 11, Jim says, "But Mars Tom, I's powerful afraid, old missus." And then line 10, I highlighted in the text, and it's bully tall. It's a bully tall. So those are all examples of words and manners of speaking that we're not quite familiar with because, one, it comes from a time like 150 years in the past, and it's words that we're not typically used to seeing. But you can see how, for example, I'm afeared. You can see how that would be I'm afraid. But those are the ways in which Mark Twain's using dialect to characterize his characters. And I believe this is the last question. Look back at the examples of dialect that you marked and compare them to your paraphrases. Think about how the story would be different if the author had not used dialect for the character. Then explain the effect of dialect on the excerpt. So here's my answer. Dialect creates a unique voice for the characters, builds characterization, and makes the characters more realistic. And so that is the end of the lesson. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I really love The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, so I'm glad that I got to do this lesson. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the reading.